Let's start. I know it is last hour and you must be all tired. So let's see if I can keep it a little smaller. And you're probably aware that your internal test schedule this week has been postponed to first week of February. So those who are not in class, please inform them. Also, as per VTU order, all tests has to be done offline. So as of now, we received circular from VTU that all tests have to be done offline. So probably same thing would happen. So based on conditions, things will plan, but anybody who is outside Bangalore, please let them know that when test schedules, they have to be in college to do the test. There will not be online test till either government revises it or VTU revises the schedule. So as of now, the tests are scheduled between Feb 1st to Feb 3rd, and they'll be offline. That means in college with physical presence. Today we'll discuss another construct, what is called control flow. Can you please keep silent? Those who are not speaking, it will be helpful. So essentially, we look at different forms of control flow statement. I get into details of one is called if statement. It could be called if then else. If something is true, do this. If something is not true, do that. Then there could be cascaded if this is true, else, if this is true, else, if this is true, multiple evaluations. And then you have something called combining multiple switches to case statement, switch case. And then we have probably look at nested if, and possibly in go-to we look at. So essentially we are saying control flow statement. What does control flow mean? Control flow basically means we are executing things in certain order, and some condition occurs, and based on the conditions, you want to change a different track or you want to follow a different set of steps, not on the regular path. Let's say you are walking on the corridor in a college something, and suddenly you see a principal coming by and not wearing your I card, you might take a different path because you see that otherwise you'll probably get a lecture or a hearing for principal saying why you're not wearing I card. So if some conditions happens, you follow a different path and then resume your path, whatever you have been continuing. That essentially means control flow. So given a particular sequence of flow, how do we change the order of execution from sequential to non-sequential? And that is what we call control flow. I can give a simple example. Let's say when somebody makes tea, I get a tea to drink. And how do we drink tea? I get a tea in a glass. I don't gulp down the entire tea in one go. I drink one sip at a time. And if after taking my sip, I figure out, oh, sugar is less, so there's a condition, result to the mark. If sugar is less, we probably add sugar, mix the sugar, and then resume back with our normal tea drinking process. In drinking tea, we can maybe look at first sip, check if sugar is less, no, do nothing, continue, and continue the process. Same way, essentially what it's saying is, we look at the condition, evaluate the condition, and conditions are always defined by what is called a Boolean expression. And Boolean expression means the result has to be either true or false. And that's the meaning of Boolean expression. If condition is true, do some extra step. If it is not true, we continue the regular path. And that is what basically we do. So first we look at a simple if statement. Then we look at different variations. And then see how do the different variations occur. Sometimes we also need to make what is called either or choice. Let's say I'm going to a road and I hit a T junction. So whether I have to take a left or take a right. Depending on what I want to do, I'll make a decision appropriately. Maybe I take a left as a longer route, but if I know on the right side there's a more police posted, I'd like to avoid the police because you don't have all disputed documents. Probably take a left if you have documents, probably take a right turn, and then you come back to resume the road. That typically happens. That happens in a circle, wherever, crossing, a T junction, you will figure it. So that is essentially what is called the either or choice, which is also called if else. Normally it is called if then else, but there is no then keyword being used. It's just that we use if statement and work with it. So this either or choice. So let's look at how do we pictorially or graphically, what we say is by flow chart or flow diagram, how we can represent the flow of if statement. So we are running some set of statement. So running some set of statements, continuing it, and then we need to make a decision, some condition occurs. So given a Boolean expression, you evaluate the Boolean expression, check if this Boolean expression is true or false. The expression is false, we continue the normal way as though nothing has happened. But if this expression happens to be true, we take a different path, execute some set of steps, and then after executing those set of steps, we resume back with the normal path again. And this is what we call is a simple if block. And we look at different examples, we work with it and see how we can achieve same results in a different forms using simple if else, and something of that kind. Other would be making either or choice. If condition is true, then take one path. If condition is false, take another path. We are executing a series of statements. At some point in time, we evaluate the condition, look at the expression, compute it, and again, all expression is Boolean expression. Any non-zero value means it is true, any zero value means it is false. That's the way she implements true and false. 1 is always true, 0 is always false. We look at that way. If the condition is true, we follow a certain segment path, execute number of statements that needs to occur for the condition is true. If condition is not true, so there are only two possibilities: either condition is true or it is not true. If it is not true, we do follow the set of statement, and after doing this, we kind of resume our flow together after executing whether the true path of the leg or one path of the leg, and that's what we can resume back. This essentially is what you call this flowchart diagram. We define in a flowchart diagram, if you see, this is called a decision box. The figure which is shown is in rhombus type scenario. It is represented as the test condition. So you do a test, evaluate true and false. It could be multi-value test, and different branches you indicate what kind of branches these are, typically true and false. Sometimes you'll see note T and F, true and false, and that's how the Venn diagrams or the flow diagrams or flow charts would appear. So let's look at syntactically how do we define in our C program, how does it will look like. So basically, we would have if and a condition, and this condition should be always written in a parenthesis, left parenthesis, right parenthesis, and then we write a one statement. So after this condition, we just write one statement, and this for sometime could be risky because if we need to have two statements, you may think we are writing below, but it may not be the case because after if it looks at only one statement. Typically, what is recommended or preferred is even if a one statement, always enclose them in the curly braces block. So the curly braces start with left curly braces, to write curly braces, whole thing is considered as one statement from if perspective. So whatever you need to add, it works fine. It works fine here. And this becomes one block. So I always recommend, I have seen my enough industry experience that when people try to miss this, putting in a block and putting in the simple for, sometimes when you modify the program, you think it's a block, you put it below, and especially those who are used to Python, where indent doesn't define the block scope, you're likely to make a big error. It's always recommended that always, even if a one line statement, put in this condition, unless you're a sort of space writing your code. Same way, if it is either or choice, we have to make if then else. So if condition, it is true, execute one set of statement. The condition is not true, execute other set of statements and follow with the remaining set of statements. Again, as part of condition, the body, this is called body, and this is a single statement. Now, again, to make sure that we don't program remain readable, we can make enhancements. Even the single statement body is always better to put in a curly braces block. That would say if condition, put in curly braces block. Similarly true for else statement. It becomes much more robust, preferred, and by doing this, even if you need to make changes, the program would not have a bug, it would work much better. So always recommend using, even if it's a single block, single statement, still use curly braces block because that gives you capability of enhancing, modifying, doing things up. Whereas in this case, it could be very risky and won't recommend to use this kind of for. So I'll take some examples. Let's take our case of given two numbers. Can you find the max? If I want to simple if, I can say that I'll assume that my first variable is the max, and I compare this with the second variable. If my first variable, which is the max, happen to be less than the second variable, that means my value should be second variable, and I said max is equal to value, and then continue. So this would give you my simple if statement. Same thing if I were to do in if else, I can do different logic, or even as I said, you've seen here, you are using a single statement block. But if you want to do safer coding, I would like to prefer to enclose this coding in a curly braces block like this, in a curly braces block, and the program becomes a lot more safer. Technically, it doesn't make a difference, but it makes a difference when you want to make changes and continue with that. This gives you simple if statement, and now we look at if else statement. In if else, I'll take the same example. Now, all I need to do is find a max. If I were to do if var1 is less than var2, if I were to say var1 is less than var2, we know that max is going to be var2. So I'm putting a block statement max is equal to var2. And if var1 is not less than var2, that means var1 could be equal to var2 or var1 could be greater than var2, and then I define my max as var1. And that's how the if else statement. So basically, if true, then execute this block. If the if condition is false, execute second block, and after that resume with normal process of operations. And that's how the conditional if statement typically works. Where do we use called cascading if, one if after the another? Let's say I want to determine what the grade is. And we know that, let's say college policy, university policy, if you got marks more than 90, yours is an A grade. So I'll say if your marks greater than 90, I set a grade to A. If your marks is less than 90, but greater than 80, that means any mark between 80 to 89 will be given a B grade, which is assigned grade is equal to B. Similarly, if marks is less than 80, but greater than 70 to 70 to 79, we would say grade is mark C, grade is C, and so on. If default, if everything happens, no this thing, then we say grade is equal to F or fail, and that's what we would define. Again, I think there's a typo error here. It should be semicolon after this statement. This is what we call conditional if. Not conditional if. The first part is basically two block if then else, and this is cascaded if, one if, two if, like three if, so on and so forth. This if can continue as long as you like to do that. Any questions on this multiple cascaded if? Anybody? Any questions about this? I've given a simple example, and these are called trivial example because when you write a real program, you may be doing a lot more. But to illustrate the concept, I used the simple example. Now, in this case, if I were to change the order, rather than I would say, if I were to say, if March is, let's say, I have to say, March is greater than 40, give the grade E. If March is greater than 50, give the grade D, and so on and so forth. Will there be a problem if I were to do that? Any questions? Any answers? Rather than putting or starting with 90, if I were to start with the lowest order, what would happen? Any thoughts? Juha?
Yes, sir.
So what would happen if I were to change the order, as I'm saying here, rather than putting greater than 90 first, if I were to say greater than 40, grade is E, greater than 50, grade is D, greater than 60, grade is C, and so on and so forth. Will there be difference? Anybody else? Venkatesh? Guys, you need to respond when calling your names. You shouldn't be hiding behind. Venkatesh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What would happen if I were to change the order? As I'm showing in the screen here. Will it work? Will it not work? If it won't work, why it won't work? Mridula?
Yes, sir.
What would happen if I were to change the order rather than what I've shown? Anybody else? Ishwar? Surabhi TG? Surabhi?
Yes, sir.
What would happen if I were to do this? The way I'm showing it here. Will it work? Will it not work?
Sir, it will not work, sir.
Why?
Sir, because it first checks the grade, sir, and then it checks the
Uh-huh.
marks. So it will not print the
So
grade.
what? No, it will print the grade. What would happen is, because I'm checking for value greater than 40, and all would be greater than 40, so if you're passed, if marks greater than 40, it will always give you grade E. It will always give you grade E, nothing else, because anything above 40 first condition would be satisfied, you'll never go to the else conditions. So even the logic looks great, but it won't work because the first condition mark greater than 40, just subset of mark greater than 50. So because first part is satisfied, you will not execute the second part. So this is what you have to be clear about, that if the second part is executed only if this condition is false. If this condition is true, then nothing else would be executed here. You have to be very clear about that part. So if whenever one condition is true, then we will not evaluate any remaining conditions. So whenever one said cascaded if, do not assume that this would work. Other case would be, let's say I were to remove this else part. If I were to remove else part, and then will this work? What would the drawback be? If I remove the else part, I simply do this. Will this work? And if so,
No, sir.
is there a difference between this and previous case? Yeah, somebody said something. Please repeat.
No, sir, it won't work.
Why it won't work? Juha? Let me assure you it will work. Not tell me why it will work, but what is the penalty we are paying?
Sir,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll be given multiple grades. Like if
No, you can't see. You can't be given multiple grades because either grade would be A or grade would be B. Finally, at the end, I can print here, print grade. Printf, I can print grade here. Okay. So grade has only one value. So you can't get multiple grades. Is that clear? Are we okay? Grade can only one value. You'll only get one grade. So what would
Yes.
happen is if you look at, let's say I got 65 marks. Let's assume that. Assume I got 65 marks. I say if mark greater than 90, not true, then look at the next step. Mark greater than 80, not true. Mark greater than 70, not true. Mark greater than 60, yes. So even if first condition is true or false, I'm still evaluating all other conditions. But in cascaded if, I evaluate other conditions only if first condition is false. If previous condition is true, I never evaluate the other conditions. So if, let's say my grade was, actually I got 92 marks, if there was no this else, everything was if, my grade would still be A, but I'll still be checking marks greater than 80. I got 92, so it will be false. Marks greater than 70, it will be false. I'll be keep evaluating it, even though it is not needed. But when I were to cascaded if else, the marks got 92, that means this condition is satisfied. I do not have to evaluate anything remaining, null skip. So performance wise, this cascaded it gives you much better performance, especially if the conditions happen to do the first one. But whether you remove this or not, it will still work. You'll probably pay a bigger price. But if I remove the cascaded if, put everything if, then irrespective of the order you put, that would still work out. It actually may not, and then if greater than, there is a bigger problem there. What would happen is, if I were to not to put cascaded if, and I have to remove if, then what will, let's say my mark is 92. My mark is 92, it won't work. First we'll say grade A, mark greater than 80, 92 is greater than 80, so my mark will grade B. When I say if mark greater than 70, because the mark is 92, it will print say grade is equal to C. So everybody will basically get the lowest possible grade. So you get F, so everybody will only get F grade, nothing else. So you have to be very, very careful when designing whether you want a cascaded if or you want a multiple if, independent if. The decision you have to look at based on depending upon how the program is. Any questions about this part?
Sir, for
Yeah.
only if statement, can you give another example?
We can come to that. Let's say I given 3 variables or 4 variables and I want to find the max. Okay. Then I can start with max is equal to 0. Then I say if max is less than var 1, max is equal to var 1. Then if max is less than var 2, those kind of cases. In this case, simple if would work. I cannot do nested, this multiple if here. Did you get me? Let me probably
sir.
show you the example in the code. Let's say if I can show you in the code. Let's say I have 4 variable int x, y, z, w. Normally, I don't prefer to write in this single line, but just to concise because the space otherwise visibility would be a problem writing this, and I would assume there are certain values. So I can say assume there are certain values which I get assigned. X is equal to a to y for arguments argv1, and same way you assign for y. Let me take it just 3 cases and you can extend it to more for simplicity right now. And let's say max, I declare int max is equal to 0, assuming I'm dealing with all positive numbers. And now after that, I can say the following to look at if max is less than x, then I would say max is equal to x. If max is less than y, I would say max is equal to y. Next, if max is less than z, I can say max is equal to z, and then I say print so we get 3 independent numbers. That's my numbers are 10, 8, 70. Will this logic work? Will my program work here? So look here, because I can 3 numbers, then I have to check against each one and make sure that that's the max. So in this case, it will work if I run this program. Let me run this program. I hope there's no compilation error. Oh, sorry, it should be equal there. And max is equal to 0. Let me run it. Oh, because I haven't passed the variables here. A to I is part of std lib. I need to include that. You see, max becomes 70.
Yes,
Is
sir.
this clear here? Now,
Yes,
if
sir.
I were to put else if, will this work? When I run this program, what would my answer be? Will I still get 17? Will I get something else? Let's run the program and can you tell me what is happening? It didn't give you 17. Can you make out what is happening?
Sir, only the first number is getting printed.
Yeah, why? What is happening? See, what is happening here is if you look at, because this condition is true, in the else case, none of these would be evaluated.
Yes, sir.
So that's the way you have to look at the program, the way things are, and then make a decision. Otherwise, you would have a real problem looking at how things are happening. So that's the way you need to decide how things are. But this would work if they happen to be something in a depending on the different order. So you have to look at the how your data is, what your logic is, then you make a decision. Are you clear about difference between when to use cascaded if like this or when to use a sequence of if? But to look at the logic, look at the program, and that is what the programming is. Programming is not mugging up if else if. Programming is making right use of when to use multiple if or when to use cascaded if. That's what the programming is, looking at the logic rather than doing something of that kind. Any questions? Let me know, otherwise I'll proceed next. Any questions here? Are we okay?
Yes, sir.
Let's move on. If you have a cascaded if and you say only one of the condition has to be true, you can put them in a different construct which is called a switch statement. So that means it will evaluate only one and not even evaluate each and everything. So let's say I just want to print, given the grade, what is the respective in the English word is. So grade is A, it should put outstanding. The grade is B, it should put good. C average, and if grade is F, you probably say fail or whatever it is. So basically you use what is called a switch statement. Switch, inside the switch, this has to be integer expression. Integer expression. So inside this switch, you can put anything. This is evaluated, and then you decide depending what the possible values. Those possible values you specify by the case. The value could be character A, value could be character B, value could be character. See, each individual character is always represented as an integer. We know that case this letter A alphabet, letter A in decimal means if you look at an ASCII table, letter A, capital A in alphabet, the integer value is 65. So whether I write A or I write 65, both are the same. Similarly, for letter B, I can write either letter character B or can write 66 because in integer terms, both are actually same. But one has to be sure that in the switch statement, we are using this integer expression, and this should be unique values. and put those values one at a time and evaluate those cases. And then you write it. The way C is designed, after you are done with a case, you have to put a break statement to break the flow. Otherwise, it will continue following that case. Quite often we miss out putting a break, and that means if grade is A, if I don't put a break statement here, like if I don't put a break statement here, and my grade happens to be A, then what will happen is it will print outstanding, then fall through, print of good, and print of fail. So to make sure that you don't fall through to the next case statement, always put a break statement, otherwise things may not work out. And this is the common flaw, common fault I see when people do a program. Sometimes if you want to do a fall through, it may be fine, but otherwise you have to make sure that this is what we are doing. And that is where you use the case statement. So the repeat, in switch, you put in a grade, everything comes in curly braces block, and whatever possible you want to deal with, put in case value 1, case value 2, case value 3, number of statements keep coming till you put a break. And lastly, if you don't know what to be done, if none of the values you know, you need a default case, you specify default column. So none of the values satisfied, it will come to the default and put that in. And that's where things will basically happen to figure out what needs to be done. And that's the way we'll probably figure out, do things up, that's what the case statement is. So depending on the logic, but make sure this expression is integer and not anything else. And that's the way it will basically work out. So in cascaded if, it will go to only one statement, come out, and that's the way it will basically would work. And this construct is very, very useful when you're trying to do menu program. When we study looping, in our next class tomorrow, we would see how looping can be done to build a menu. Menu is what you want to do. Let's say you want to build a calculator. First you want to do an add. Then you say, so we will use a switch to define what you want to do, take the operation and do that part. And that's where we will try to look at how do you want to do that mini statement. So switch is typically when you have one of the multiple choices, things clear. So using switch construct with case is much better construct than using cascaded if, because that was the readability. This gives you much better readability, and you're very, very clear how do we go about it. And that is what we would switch statement for. Other possibility we do is what is called a nested if. Can I have if inside a if? Can I have if inside a switch? Can I have a switch inside an if? All that is possible. And there is no limit that how much nesting you can do. You can do nesting one if inside another, third if inside second if, and so on and so forth. And again, you need to look at whatever you want to go. Generally recommended that do not build a nesting more than 3 levels. Because if you build a nesting more than 3 levels, technically you can write a program, it would work. But when you want to debug, debugging or tracing would become a lot more difficult. So maintaining code, which is more than 3 level deep, is a lot more tougher. So my strong recommendation is limit to 3 levels, max 4, not beyond. If you're trying to do more than that, that means the program structure is not right. You need to rethink. And that is what the programming is about. Programming is not about doing a coding. Programming is developing a logic and then using right appropriate structure to build that logic. And that is what basic programming would be. So we just switch a statement when you have multiple choices, and switch expression should be integer expression. I said after each case, you need to put a break statement. If you miss it, it will fall through and you look at it. So I haven't given the code for this. Assuming I need to calculate income tax, and we know that if your income is more than 30%, you pay, sorry, if income is more than 10 lakh, you pay 30% tax. If income is more than 20%, you pay, sorry, income is more than 5 lakh, you pay 20% tax. If income is more than 2.5 lakh, you pay 10% tax, and so on and so forth. So how would you like to add if income is less than 2.5 lakh? How do you build a switch statement? Any thoughts? Given this case, so there are 4 cases. How do you like to put a switch statement here?
Can you
Give
repeat
your
the
thought.
question?
So given that I want to compute tax, that if your income is more than 10 lakh rupees, you pay tax at the rate of 30%. 30% over income about 10 lakh. Below income, you pay appropriately. If your income is about 5 lakh, you pay 20% tax above income of 5 lakh till 10 lakh rupees. If your income is about 2.5 lakh, you pay 10% tax till 5 lakh. After 5 lakh to 10 lakh, you pay 20% tax, and then you pay 30% tax on the income of 10 lakh. But if income is less than 25 lakh, what is that you can do about? If I were to write a switch statement, think of a logic where you can get into switch statement. Assuming I give you income in some X lakh rupees. How it will take switch statement so that it falls through in a proper case statement. So that's the exercise I'm giving you. Try to work out and see if you can write a program or to build a switch structure, switch and the case, so that there should be only 4 cases and you should be done with it. Think about it the way you like to do, and then we can probably plan out what needs to be done. The ranges here, so let's see if you can build something, and then we try to put some mathematics. Otherwise, we'll look at the scenario tomorrow. Okay. So other is nested if, and we given the example there. Let's say given 3 numbers, I want to find max. So first I compare first 2 numbers. If A is greater than B, the condition is true, then I know B is not the max. Either A could be the max or C could be the max. So within this block of body of the if true, I'll compare A with C. But I know B cannot be the max, so there's no point comparing B. So now I'll compare is A greater than C. If A is greater than C, max is A, else my max would be, sorry, it should be C here. There's a typo error there, it should be C. Because max can't be B. And this is what I call as nested. Within this if statement, I have the entire one if block. This is what we call as nested if. So nesting an if statement, inside this bigger if is what we call as nested if. If A is not greater than B, then either A is equal to B or A is less than B, then we can say either the B is max or C could be the max. Because A can't be the max, when we take B could be the max, then I need to compare else if B is greater than C. So we look at else. If B is greater than C, then I know my max would be B or max would be C, and then I should be done. And that is where, so again in the else part, I have another nested if. Or depending on the logic, you could have further multiple nestings here. You could have another nesting inside here, another nesting inside here. For example, if my question is given 3 numbers, A, B, and C, can you print them in ascending order? How to print them in ascending order? So if I were to look at, assuming the question is print 3 numbers in the ascending order. So rather than finding a max, put them in the, let's say, ascending order. Then if I were to put that, then I will have multiple nested if. First I look at if A greater than B, then I know that B is certainly not the max. B can't be at the end. Now A is greater than C, then I know that A is certainly the max. But I do not know whether C is bigger than B or C is less than B. At this point in time, I know that both B and C are less than A, but we don't know which one of B and C is bigger. So here, instead of this, I will put another statement here. If B is less than C, when I do this, this implies B is less than C and C is less than A, we already know. That means I can say print in the order B, C, A. And this will give me something. If B is not less than C, so I know that A is greater than B. I know that A is greater than C, A is the max. And we know that B is not less than C. That means C is the smallest, B is the second one, and A is larger than B. And then I would probably say else print order would be C, B, A. And same way you need to put a logic about this if block. And if you see here in this case, I have put 3 levels of nesting. First if, second if, third if. So let me repeat. Is the first if, then I have a second nested if, and then I have a third nested if. So depending on how do you do, there are multiple nesting levels, but you should be able to do with this logic, and this becomes case of multiple nested if. So again, you have to look at how to use the nested structure, whether one level, two level, something of that kind, and we have to be very, very careful. Again, as I said earlier, this is a free form language. Just because you're trying to do something, let's say if I were not to put this curly braces here, if I were to remove the curly braces here and then simply put that in, what would happen? Then max would be taken outside, there's no else, simply max would become B irrespective of what is happening. And those are the mistakes that would happen. So if I put a curly braces, I'll be better off. So to look at very carefully where the else should be, where it shouldn't be. If you don't put a curly braces, any other statement, second statement, will not be part under this if block.
Sir, is it possible to write
Indentation,
two ifs in one condition?
like for example,
Like you're given A is greater than B and also A is
yeah,
greater than C.
yeah, you can write that as a Boolean expression. So you can certainly write,
Okay.
I can write, let's say if, let me write it for you. If A, sorry, A is greater than B and A greater than C, you can certainly do that. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir, in one line.
Yeah, you can do that. So whether you want to use and or whether you want to use or mix of it, you need to look at the logic and then make a decision there. And there is no limit how many such and or you want to do. There's no such limit. Only thing, if you take too many clauses like this, your readability would be lost, but certainly can be done. C doesn't prevent you. As I said, C gives you a lot of flexibility. It is you as a user has to decide at what level flexibility you want to use. So important is when you're writing a program, but to look at you are going to maintain it, and you are the one who's reading it, so it should be maintainable. If you want, the whole thing can be written in a single line. Readability. Everything could be written in a single line, but we'll probably lose the readability part, and that will create a problem. For example, if I were to say, I can actually write whole thing as to look at C doesn't prevent me doing this. I can keep doing this. Whole thing could be a single line, but C doesn't prevent me. But if you do this, your readability completely would be lost. If you don't know what is happening, you'll be scratching your head. So always better to use the right indentation so that readability becomes clear. But from C perspective, it doesn't really matter. That's why we call C is a free form language, because either way this could work. But that would be a very bad program. You have to write everything in a nested way. Or I can even write, like this. This is what mostly I see when people write in the lab. I see program like this. From C perspective, this program would work. But you know how difficult it will be if thing doesn't work. You do not know what actually is happening. When you write a program, make sure you do proper indentation so that follow. If you're trying to do like this, it will be very, very bad program. And you have a tough time writing any such programs. So we talk about nested if, and that's what I want to talk about. So we're out of time, so probably I'll stop here. This is the one extra go-to statement, which I'll talk about tomorrow when you talk about looping. Any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm done for today. If no questions, you can drop out. Any questions, please feel free.